today for today's environmental forum. We have with us Ryan Johnston from Daily Axe, and he's going to discuss permaculture with us. So please welcome Ryan Johnston.
Thank you, everyone. Good to be here. Is that level all right on the mic? Cool. You have to forgive me. I'm just getting over that head cold that took up residency right here in me, and it's really nice to be able to breathe again. It's a small thing sometimes. But as Katie said, my name is Ryan Johnston. I work for the Daily Axe organization, and she asked me to speak a little bit more about myself as well leading into this. I actually grew up here in Sonoma County, out in Occidental, and went to Almelino High School, and then went off to the University of Oregon and studied environmental studies up there, which was totally depressing. It was this sort of multidisciplinary download on all the biggest challenges facing our planet. And I left that experience sort of spinning and really looking for a pathway to apply myself in a way that felt meaningful to sort of get at the root of the issue and, you know, really help move the solutions into being. And there's this great saying that I've been meditating on a lot recently, and it's action dispels despair, right? And I found myself in that place of despair kind of in academia, swimming in all this stuff, quantifying and qualifying the issues. But it wasn't really until I started kind of reconnecting with my roots in gardening and growing food and permaculture. I took a permaculture design course that totally, you know, split my head open in a really beautiful way. That I started kind of feeling hopeful again about being alive at this time on the planet. So I took a permaculture design course 3 years ago. Just curious, how many folks know what permaculture is? Or beautiful. For those of you that don't know, it's a decision-making framework, basically, for repatterning human settlements based on the design principles of nature. At its essence, it basically looks to nature and says, you know, what's the wisdom that's here that we can then apply to how we develop things to work in those same sort of ways, work harmoniously, work with nature. So I took a permaculture design course, spent a year kind of constructively wandering outside the country, mostly in Southeast Asia, working on farms and whatnot. And it was a really opportunity for me to turn inward and sort of connect with myself in a much deeper way than I ever had. And I was on that trip and I'm like, I'm going to do permaculture professionally. I had no idea what that really meant, but came back to Sonoma County, quickly found a publication by Daily Axe, a little Ripples journal, if you've ever seen one of those. And showed up as a volunteer, was quickly hired on as an intern. 3 months later, I came on staff, and that was about 2.5 years ago. So it's been a really fun ride, and I've been totally immersed in this amazing solutionary community that we have here in Sonoma County. So I'm going to speak a little bit about that and some of the work that we've been doing. I'm curious, how many folks have heard of Daily Axe before? Quite a few folks, excellent. So we're a nonprofit organization based in Petaluma that we do work Sonoma County-wide. And our mission, as you see up here, is to transform our communities through inspired action and education, which builds leadership and local self-reliance. And that leadership piece, while we're totally fortunate to work with business leaders and elected officials, the leadership piece in our mission is really about creating leaderful societies, full of people leading with how they live. Very much that Gandhian be the change, right? So we do this through presentations like this one. We do workshops, tours, community groups. Our work is really about sort of walking people along that path of first waking up to this dynamic moment in planetary history we're living in, and then getting inspired to do something about it, gaining the skills and knowledge to then bring about that transformation that I think that we all so deeply seek. And the really beautiful thing about that path is that it's not linear. It's cyclical. And in that transformation, there is, again, the inspiration and sharing the inspiration with others. And in doing so, that ripple kind of continues to grow. So our major subject for today is water, this precious little molecule, kind of a Mickey Mouse molecule of sorts, right, with the oxygen on the bottom and 2 hydrogens on top. It's self-cleaning, it's self-cooling. Its solid self floats on its liquid self, which is pretty amazing. You know, life on this planet would be extremely different if that wasn't the case. And there's really no other molecule on the planet like it. Some of you might have been misled to think that we live on planet Earth. We, in fact, live on planet water. You know, 70% of the Earth's surface is water, just as 70% of our volume in our bodies is water. And it's really amazing in the sense that it's sort of this finite resource, that there's a finite amount of it that's infinitely circulating within the planet. Maybe you've heard the means to sort of visualize it. If you had a gallon of water, right, 97% of that would be salty. if we're talking about the planet's water. Another 2% of that is locked up in ice on the planet. Then that final 1% is all the fresh water we have to meet all of our needs on the planet. And we've already contaminated about half of that. So we're down to 0.5% of all the water on the planet to meet our needs, which is kind of mind-blowing. And Mama Gaia is running a fever right now. We got this little thing called global weirding upon us, right? It's funny, like I was in school 3 years ago or something, and in a lot of ways it was still sort of like abstracted off in the future. What would this look like? And I feel like we're very much living into that now, and we're seeing it show up. Maybe you've heard of this little body, the IPCC, this international body of scientists. And I just want to call your attention to both that it's extremely likely that the climate change is caused by human influences, but that aside, we're watching the climate change, and as it changes, I think it's just interesting to note that every single one of the measures for the climate changing is water-based, right? We live on planet water. It has to be water-based. So then when we talk about sustainability, what is sustainability? Does anyone want to wager a definition? Anyone? No? Continue to do them forever? Tell me more. Okay. So as far as I can tell, sustainability basically, as you're totally saying, the more I was looking for is, what are we sustaining, right? Are we sustaining business as usual? Or are we sustaining those cycles that support life on the planet, right? And at the essence of all of that is the water cycle, right? No water, no life. So if we talk about sustaining one thing, I think we best sustain the water cycle. Like that's kind of the one thing that's up, is this sort of barometer, right? It's been said, and I think it's really poetic, that the principal measure of how we live on the land is the health of our waters, right? Water sort of permeates all of this. And we got this really great slow food movement going, and there's a slow money movement up and running. But if we don't have a slow water movement to underpin all of that, it's kind of all for naught. So that's why I get really excited about talking about water. Of course, there's the water cycle. And we live this really funny time on the planet. Water is so core to our being, yet if you ask the average American to name one part of the water cycle, most people can't. So there's this crazy hydro-illiteracy going on as well, even though this is something that touches us in such a fundamental way on a daily basis. So we have this infinite water cycle, continually going on. And then when we root that into place, we start talking about this concept of watersheds. I don't know if you know who John Wesley Powell is, early 19th century. He's a geologist making his way, one of the first pioneers to make his way from the East Coast to the West Coast. And he's heading across, and he's looking at this relationship between people, plants, water. And I love how he talks about, living things are inextricably linked to the common course of water. Inextricably basically means tangled to the point where you can't untangle them. So when we start talking about, water in place, the water cycle and the life cycle of place are really one and the same. So I think our job as designers, as humans alive on this planet, is to bring those two things back into harmony again. A watershed might look like this, from ridgeline to river mouth, that whole basin of which water falls and then flows down. Hugely important, especially in Sonoma County. We also think about the subsurface flows of water, right? Something like 50% of folks in Sonoma County get their water from subsurface flows. But maybe we start thinking about watersheds like this. It's basically our lifeboat as we go forward, this basin of relations. So when we start talking about sustainability and start applying it to place, I think watersheds become this really beautiful unit of perception with which to think about where we start rooting into this concept of sustainability, right? So if we turned on the tap, outside the room here in the bathroom or whatever, where would the water be coming from? Russian River, definitely. So subsurface flows pumped here, Woolard, I don't know if I have one of these. Right here, Woolard Bridge. That's totally hard to read. This is from the Sonoma County Water Agency. So Russian River and Russian River water comes by way of two major reservoirs, Lake Sonoma and Lake Mendocino. Some of it by the Potter Valley project is coming over from the Eel River as well. And Sonoma County Water Agency provides the water for all the folks down to Petaluma, where I live, over to Sonoma Valley, all the way down into Novato even. But before our last rains, this is what Lake Mendocino looked like. It was down to like 17% of its total. You guys all know this. You've been seeing what's going on. Drought is up in a really big way. And then 2013, in Petaluma, we got like 6 inches of precipitation. We usually get 25. And even with those last rains we got, we still need at least 6 inches more of rain to be at the worst drought year prior to that, which is 1976. So the water levels on all fronts, and this is sort of like not a 1-year thing, it's more like a 3-year thing, and it could be a much larger cyclical thing. But water level as a whole is lowering. So going back to that climate change sort of thing and global weirding, right? So the water cycle, it's getting weirder. And so you get these larger peaks and troughs, right? That sine curve. So the tail of the snake is starting to whip a little bit more, right? And so normally we get all of our water basically in 4 months here in our Mediterranean climate. And so all the projections basically predict that we'll be getting, maybe more water, maybe less water, but it'll be coming in shorter and shorter windows. Like that rain event we got 2 weekends ago, right? Where it was like, we got like 12 inches of rain or something crazy in like, 3-4 days or something like that. So it's coming in smaller and smaller windows. So I think the game is, how do we capture that? Because presently, when it does rain really hard, and we're all sitting out there, we want to rain, we want to rain, we want to rain, and then it does rain, and this is what happens, right? Like, this is how our built environment interacts with the rain presently. We're not even ready to receive it when it comes. And so it sort of just flows away, downstream. So that's kind of the real piece that I'm going to get at today, is how do we start repatterning that? And I love talking about patterns as well, because it's like, what is that fundamental root sort of piece that we're getting at that bubbles up? We're not looking at Band-Aids on the surface sort of thing, but getting at the essence of it. So I think, at the core of this whole thing is, how do we perceive water? Do we see it as a problem, and we pave, pipe, and pollute it, which is kind of the present paradigm with which we live in, right? If you look at our built environment. Or do we switch our perceptions, switch our patterning of how we build, and we see it as a solution to slow it, spread it, and sink it, as a natural forest or a grassland would do? And this comes by way of the great work from the Occidental Arts and Ecology Center out in West Sonoma County, the Water Institute out there. Check them out, a whole treasure trove of great resources. Definitely been a big mentorship for me in my upcoming. And from them, there's this concept, there's a whole bunch of ecosystem restoration to be done. But I think before we get to the ecosystem restoration, it's really about the ecosystem restoration, right? How do we tell a new story of what it means to be human and alive on the planet? And when we talk about conservation, I think people often kind of cringe and like, ooh, conservation, like that's giving up quality of life. But I think in conservation, there's this really beautiful opportunity to get at what really matters to us and prune away the rest of the stuff. Prune away that which isn't serving us, right? Because the richest man or woman is not the one who has the most, but the one who needs the least, right? And so there's a huge design opportunity within that. And it all starts with us, first in our headwaters, right? Because we've got to get the water situation right here, right? Mitigate the cerebral imperviousness, with the water right between our dang ears, and then kind of go back into that place of beginner's mind and wonder, Go and observe nature and start repatterning from there. So this is sort of the slice of what we're looking at for the average residential water use. And most of what I'm going to be focusing on is getting at this larger pie of the outdoor water use. That said, washing machines make up about 12%. We're going to talk about basically 4 things today. We're going to talk about sheet mulching as a means to both build soil or transform turf into healthy living topsoil. We're going to talk about rainwater harvesting, both in soil and in tanks. We're going to talk about food forest, perennial polycultures that mimic a forest ecology, both in form and function. We'll get into that a bit more. They use dramatically less water than, say, lawn. And then gray water reuse, did I say that one already? Gray water reuse. So the gray water reuse is getting at that washing machine part. So how do we get another use out of our water coming from our washing machines and use it as landscape irrigation, basically? And of course, before getting into any of this, hugely important to reduce your use. There's a bunch of great resources out there on this. I'm not going to get too deep into it. The Sonoma County Water Agency has a bunch of wonderful stuff up on their website about this. But it starts with those little small daily actions sort of thing, right? Turning off the tap when you brush your teeth. You guys got it. You're rocking it, I'm sure. Repair as well. I just want to give a shout out to this because, Daily Acts is really fortunate. We do the WaterWise education for 3 cities, Petaluma, Cotati, and Windsor. And, the city folks often tell me, people let those little leaks go for long periods of time, and a small leak running over a long period of time means a lot of water lost. You have a gusher of a leak, it's like, oh my gosh, I gotta fix that, of course. But those small leaks continue to run. So I just wanted to, put some numbers behind that and reiterate how important it is just to even fix those small leaks. And those cities I just mentioned, along with Santa Rosa and maybe some of the other cities, will actually come out and do a WaterWise audit of your house for you, whether you own your house or you're in a rental. And they'll help you kind of assess where these leaks are, find them, and then fix them. Replace, those cities I mentioned as well, a great many of them have great incentive programs to upgrade your washing machine or your dishwasher. They'll provide you a little aerator for your tap, which actually makes it lower flow, but feels like there's still plenty of water coming out. Low flow fixtures for your showers. All that stuff is hugely important too. And it's really the low hanging fruit, a one-time fix, and you're dramatically reducing your use through time. And then on the outdoor front, as I said, we're gonna talk about turning lawn to lunch and then what you might plant in place of that. I'm not gonna touch on it too much today, but upgrading your sprinkler system to drip irrigation is another kind of, I wouldn't call it low hanging fruit. There's a little bit more of an investment there, but also hugely important. Turning lawn to lunch. Has anybody ever heard of this technique called sheet mulching? Has anyone ever done it? Nice. Who can tell me about it? How did you use it when you did it? Some of you guys have done it, so how are you using it?
Well, it's a really great way to get rid of weeds or lawn, definitely. And actually, we grow a lot of vegetables at my house, so we'll put it, just mulch without the cardboard underneath it down around the plants to help save water and to keep them warm also in the winter.
Totally. Thank you. So she was saying it's a really easy technique. And even, I appreciate you bringing up just putting down mulch as well. Before you even get into sheet mulching, one of the best things you can do for your garden, obviously you're not going to put mulch on top of your lawn, but if you do have existing perennial plants or veggies, just putting a thick layer of mulch is one of the best things you can do to help your garden be more water-wise. But this technique of sheet mulching is basically like making lasagna on top of your lawn, where you'll lay down, the grass stays in place, you lay down a layer of compost, then a continuous layer of cardboard, and then a layer of mulch on top of it, and the whole thing just decomposes in place. And this contrasts to the old best practice for removing lawn or transforming lawn, which is to literally dig it up and take it away. But where is away on a finite planet, right? And so it would go into the landfill and it would decompose anaerobically, and it would produce methane, which is 23 times more potent as a greenhouse gas, plus there's all that embodied energy in that whole process of taking it to the landfill. So instead, you do this, you leave that living layer that's on top in place. You divert a bunch of materials from the waste stream, the compost, the cardboard, the mulch. It's all coming from, it all can come from Sonoma compost, which is literally being diverted from the waste stream. And you create this healthy living topsoil on top of it. So, the cities I mentioned before, Petaluma, Cotati, Santa Rosa, Windsor, they all have incentive programs to help folks do this. And it's kind of crazy, the #1 crop in the US is lawn, which is like kind of absurd. But I'm super excited about the drought for the reason that, people aren't watering their lawn right now, and it's brown and it looks bad, and all the neighbors are like, oh, you gotta change that. So I think there's this huge opportunity to roll out a whole lot more sheet mulching. And then in place of it, hopefully put some edibles or at least some habitat or something. So this is a lawn that we sheet mulched up in Windsor. Anyone drink Revive Kombucha? This is actually the owners of Revive Kombucha. We help them sheet mulch their front lawn. And it's been this total conversation point, right? This is like this very typical sort of suburban neighborhood in Windsor. Everyone else has lawns, and they did this, and everyone's like, what the hell are you doing? And they all came over, and it's like an opportunity for Sean and Rebecca to totally engage and meet their neighbors, and they're coming to ask a question, and it's this opportunity for you to hand them a little bit of knowledge and to share with them what they're doing. So low water use natives here. They didn't want too much food growing. They didn't want to have to take care of that. And then drip irrigation on top of that. And 20 volunteers get together, and we spend an afternoon doing this, and it all gets done, and we all meet new folks and enjoy conversation. It doesn't really feel like you did much work, and we enjoy lunch together and stuff, and go home, and it's this really sort of beautiful thing. No one worked too hard. We walked away with some new relationships, new knowledge. It's a pretty cool thing. So Daily Axe has been really fortunate to do this, the sheet mulching. We've helped pioneer this as a best practice locally, both on the home scale, but also creating community-powered parks across the county. We have a number of these on city property in Petaluma, the Kavanaugh Center outside of City Hall, in Pocket Park in Cotati is another one, Robbins Park up in Windsor. And so these are community parks that had lawn, and we'll come out and we'll do these big community mobilizations, get a bunch of people together, sheet mulch them. That's the Wise Corps students up there at Robbins Park on the upper left, from Windsor High School, out here in front of the police department in Petaluma, over there in Windsor again, right in front of City Hall in Sebastopol. And then in place of them, we plant food forest. I'll get into the food forest thing in a minute. So anyway, we create these parks that are sort of these living examples of low water use landscapes of what could be, and they act as educational landscapes, living learnscapes through time. And so our goal is really, how can we create a sheet mulching movement here in Sonoma County as this sort of new best practice? And as one example alone, you've been working with the cities to have incentive programs. In the city of Petaluma, they'll actually bring you all the materials for free to sheet mulch your lawn over for qualified both business and residential folks. And in the last 3 years, over 500 lawns representing 16 acres have been sheet mulched in Petaluma alone. So it's really cool. I mean, you can see this stuff can really, really go to scale. And just kind of a note on that, all the solutions I'm going to talk about today are low tech, relatively low cost, and they're community powered, and they sort of look to nature as their inspiration. And which gets me excited about all of those different drivers is they're things that can absolutely go to scale today. It's not like something that's this crazy engineering problem that we have to work out, and when we do, energy storage batteries or something, we'll be able to scale. Like, these are solutions that can absolutely go to scale today. So as I was mentioning, sheet mulch the lawns over. And then in place of them, we've been creating these food forests. And a food forest is basically a perennial polyculture. So for the most part, it's plants that live multiple years, perennial plants. And when you plant them in layers that mimic a forest ecology both in form and function. So you can see here, in this one I like it, there's 9 different layers. They have this water edge over here. But you go from, the tubers, the root crops in the ground, and then ground covers, and an herbaceous layer, then a shrub layer, and then a dwarf tree layer, and then an upper canopy, and you can grow vines up that canopy. You've got the stuff on the edges there, growing in the water. And they even include the mycelium in here too, right? Get that harvest of fungus as well. And so you're basically planting a whole community there that sifts, sorts, and cycles water and nutrients, again, like a natural ecosystem would. And so there's some plants that are sequestering the nitrogen out of the atmosphere and making it available to the other plants. There's other ones that are accumulating minerals out of the soil and bringing it up into their leaves and making it available for others. There's some that are calling in the beneficial insects as pollinators. There's others that are repelling the insects. There's some that are producing fruit. Some are producing shade for others and creating mulch. And so you have all these sort of functions, sifting, sorting, and cycling on top of each other. And that could be something really clean and elegant, or front yards could look something like this. Totally stacked full of edible, medicinal, and habitat plants that I think also provides this yield of an abundance of beauty. But you can go out in your landscape, and totally just go and graze through that whole thing, as can the birds, the bees, and the butterflies. And all while using 60 to 80% less water. and through time bringing in way, way less resources. And I would definitely be planting 2 trees, 2 larger trees. You can string up your hammock in between, right, and enjoy the fruits of your labor, right? The designer recliner in there is key. So just some water for thought. You know, I talk about growing food often, and people are like, oh, growing food, you know, that takes so much water. And it's like, yes, it definitely does take more water than maybe a low water use native that can basically go dormant in the summer. But when we talk about this water issue, it's a lot more than just the water you pay for on your water bill, right? We really have to start thinking about the embodied water. We talk about embodied energy often, but embodied water of the products you buy as well. You know, and like some of these numbers make me take pause, you know, certainly. So when you're growing your own, you're really reducing your water footprint all the way across. And I think when we start talking about footprints as well, people are like, oh my gosh, it's kind of paralyzing. You know, you're like, you know, anything you sort of look into, you're like, oh, it's got a huge footprint. So I think the move for all of us right now on the planet is really balancing our footprint with our handprint and making sure that we have a bigger handprint, the positive impact we have on the planet, with the negative footprint we have. And if we all can have a bigger handprint than we do our footprint, we'll be fine. So then shifting as well to talk about rainwater harvesting. And I really wasn't sure how to put these all together. I mean, they all kind of integrate with each other. You know, if you do the sheet mulching, if you increase, in doing sheet mulching, you increase the organic material in your soil. And by increasing the organic material in your soil by just 1%, you increase its water retention capability by 10%. You know, so just alone by sheet mulching, or even by mulching without the sheet in it, you dramatically increase the living sponge of your site. So like that's a great place to start, and you're water harvesting there. But how do we like kick that up even more, another notch, and take advantage of this high quality water, which is delivered to our doorsteps for free, basically, right? I mean, it's kind of absurd. You know, we pay for water, and then when the rain falls, we make it run off, literally run off, you know, quickly. So how do we change that? And this is, you know, as I was kind of talking about there, the present paradigm where when water hits the site in like all ways, it's directed off and away, right? And this is a desiccation paradigm, basically. You know, if you think about it, we're sucking out of the groundwater, but we're not paying back in, you know, and how sustainable is it to be drawing out of your checking account without depositing back in? That's essentially what we're doing, right? And so even if we get a bunch of water this year, you know, we're kind of not out of the woods on the drought front because we've been doing this and playing this game for years now, and it's starting to catch up with us. I mean, there's places in the Southwest where like the ground is literally sinking hundreds of feet because we've depleted the aquifers so much that they're collapsing on themselves. So going from the drain age to the retain age, you know, and this work comes by way of Brad Lancaster, doing some really, really rocking work down in Tucson, Arizona. And it's definitely not just a drylands thing, but he's making it work with, you know, 10 inches of precipitation, which is the average rain that they get there. And he's turned his landscape into this living oasis. And I'm really glad to announce we're actually going to be bringing Brad Lancaster to Sonoma County to speak on April 17th. So more details to come on that. But he has 2 great books, Rainwater Harvesting for Drylands and Beyond, volumes 1 and 2. If you want to dig more deeply into that, I would highly recommend those 2 as a starting place to do that. So, you know, we talk about watersheds from ridgeline to river mouth, and it's really cool because watersheds are sort of fractal linear in a sense. They're nested within themselves, right? And so we can talk about a watershed on a macro scale as we sit here in the, you know, the Laguna de Santa Rosa watershed nested within the Russian River watershed. Or you can just talk about a watershed as your home site, you know, the top of the watershed being the ridge of your roof. And then it's stepping down and flowing off of your property is the place, you know, where it leaves your little micro watershed. And I encourage you all next time it rains just to go out there and just map your micro watershed, see where the water's flowing, where are the opportunities to just, you know, move the ground a little bit to encourage it to pool and sink in, where appropriate. You know, don't stick it next to your foundation or anything. But you can see here instead of it all running off and we have our tree on our high points and stuff and we quickly encourage it to run away, taking with it all the really healthy living topsoil, we just create little basins for that water to pool, slow, spread, and sink. And it comes off the roof and into a tank and fills the tank and overflows and into here, and then finally would maybe make its way down. instead of run off, we actually have run in, right? What if we acknowledge the streets as the ephemeral creeks that they are and use them to water our street trees by making them just a little bit lower? I encourage you, when you leave here today, just go walk around, even like in the parking lot here on campus or anywhere. It's kind of crazy to notice that oftentimes we do. We put our vegetation at the high points of these little micro watersheds, right? Which is totally backwards if we wanted the water to infiltrate at the roots of those trees. So this is what it might look like, a small example in practice. This is actually a little system we set up at the City Hall in Petaluma. But again, that water comes off the roof, fills up these tanks, overflows, always designed for your overflow, comes down this little rocky basin and then goes into this big rain garden where it's encouraged to slow, spread, and sink into the water or into the soil, and then eventually makes its way up and then down into the storm drain as it would. Totally small, in a lot of ways insignificant, but a teachable moment there for sure. And if you start doing the calculations, 1 inch of rain falling on 1,000 square feet of roof is 600 gallons. In Petaluma, we get about 25 inches of rain a year. I don't know what you all get here in Santa Rosa. 31. Occidental, where I grew up, gets about 55. So it's quite diverse around the county. But when you map it out, even in a low rainfall year, there's an incredible amount of water that falls pretty much anywhere. And so I would say, tanks are really great. They're kind of expensive. So start with just trying to capture it in the soil. That's one of the best places you can do it. Slow it, spread it, sink it into the soil, and then use plants as these living pumps that they are to pump that water back out. And water, in that it's cohesive, is really neat. If you sink a bunch of water into a site, you'll actually raise the water table of that place by drawing the water table up. Eric Olson, this really amazing permaculturalist in Sebastopol, in his backyard, has sank millions of gallons of water in there. He's actually diverted the storm drain to sink it into earthworks like this. And in 4 years, he's been able to take his fruit trees completely off of drip irrigation because he's raised the water table of place so much. So I think we're really only scratching the surface of what could be in this abundance paradigm. Yeah?
Does he live right there off the 116?
He has a site off of 116, the Permaculture Skills Center, across from the flea market. Yeah, and that's open to the public. Go check that out, 5-acre model site. He actually lives downtown on a smaller site, but they're doing that exact same thing at the Permaculture Skills Center. Has anyone been to the Permaculture Skills Center on Highway 116? Nice. Excellent. And thank you for asking the questions as well. I know I'm kind of rambling on up here, so if you have questions at any point, something sitting in the front of your head, don't hesitate. Any questions on water harvesting before we go to gray water?
Are there any restrictions on what you can use the water for that you've collected off the roof? For example, can you store it in a tank for some period of time and then use it on your vegetable garden? Mm-hmm. So as opposed to gray water recovery where there's county restrictions and so forth, permitting requirements.
Right. To my knowledge, I don't think there's any restrictions about capturing it, using it in a tank, and then irrigating with it. Best practice would be to not let it be exposed to sunlight at any point. Basically, small amount of nutrients and sunlight makes algae growth. But outside of that, no, if you want to use it as irrigation, I don't believe there's any restrictions. There are restrictions on the size of your tanks and where you site those. 5,000 gallons is sort of the upper limit for needing a permit for a tank, which is a pretty darn large tank. And you can get a bunch of them, string them together, and get around that as well if you want to go bigger.
I just got a rain barrel, and my question is, what is the quality of rain? I remember acid rain being an issue, and with the things that are happening, with the Japan and the like, nuclear reactor, and are we getting polluted rain?
Sure, good question. So her question was, what's the quality of the rain falling on your roof? It's kind of a joke in permaculture. It depends. It always depends, right? The first thing I'd be looking into as well is what's the material on your roof? How old is your roof? Definitely the concerns you voiced as well. I haven't heard a lot about the acid rain being an issue, and I haven't been keeping up on the Fukushima front, whether that radiation is drifting over here. Paul Stamets put out that report a month and a half ago saying that, still sort of insignificant compared to a lot of other things. So I don't have a quick and clean answer for you. I would say, if you have a concern, get it tested, certainly.
Well, yeah, okay. Because the follow-up to that is, I just figured it's not drinking water. I was figuring I'd use it to water the plants,
Yeah.
the vegetables, but then are you then feeding the vegetables stuff that would eventually be harmful to me?
Right. Great question. So she was saying that, she's using it to water vegetables, and would the vegetables, uptake that and it be harmful to her? And as I understand it, actually, one of the women who we work with who does the rainwater systems, her uncle is actually a plant pathologist at Davis, and apparently very little of that material actually makes it up into the plants and into the fruiting body of the plants where it would be harmful to you. It's not that difficult to turn it into potable water. I mean, that's totally low-hanging fruit. But I would say, if you're going to be using potable water to irrigate your garden or your rain harvest, you could just totally use your rain harvest and offset, what you'd be using as potable water. Again, if you have a concern, get it tested. But in most cases, you're pretty good to go, I would say. There's not anything that's glaring out there, if you feel comfortable about what it's coming off of on the roof. Yes.
Yeah, I did a rain barrel workshop in my old job, and from what I read online, it's not the rain you have to worry about, it's your roof. Like if you have a copper roof or an asphalt roof, you could be washing off like heavy metals or petroleum products that you don't want. Like if you eat, I don't know about, I think fruits are okay, but if you eat like lettuce or something, I think it might go into the plants. And also just like bacteria from animal stuff on your roof, so you should just read about it.
Definitely, yeah. So I think that's spot on. The asphalt roofs are probably the place of the biggest concern for me. And then also, as you were talking about, getting a first flush system as well, so the first 10, 20, 50, 100 gallons or whatever that comes off your roof actually is diverted off and doesn't go into your storage system is a really important way to go, I would say.
Resources where we can get tanks and whatnot to do this?
What size tanks are you talking about?
I mean, I have a 6 acre, so we don't have a lot of space
Right.
for like large scale setup. But so something for a house, for a couple big barrels for rainwater or something.
Okay. So the question was, where can you get tanks locally? I know there's plenty of places where you can get food grade recycled 55-gallon drums. Those. We're working with a woman named Jessie Froelich who has Blue Barrel Systems, which is a local company that just got up and started. I don't know of anywhere else to direct you offhand. I know Freeman Brothers was selling them as well. I would say, I would first start at like FreeCycle and stuff, or put something out on Craigslist. I mean, there's a lot of places that are getting rid of them. I know wineries in particular will use them for their fermentation process, or people use them to make pickles or something, and you can get those for free, which is often a really cool way to go. And if you want larger tanks, Harmony Farm Supply is a really great place to go. For the bigger size stuff.
I know a good resource for that. They have the 225-gallon transport, for freight and trucking. And it's used as food grade, and rather than sending them back empty, they sell them to places like Ukai and trucking transport places.
Nice.
Relatively cheap, like $100, $150. They have the 300-gallon ones, stackable, big valves. I mean, they're pretty neat. I mean, the cost value.
Yeah.
What it is.
So what he's talking about are often called ICB totes, I believe. Yeah, ICB.
Cages. Pretty neat on a pallet. Real light.
Cool. What was your name?
Albert.
Albert. So connect with Albert after class if you're looking for some IBC totes. I'll point you in the right direction. Other questions?
What is the current process in Sonoma County for taking the water that's coming down in rain and eventually ending up in our city, kind of coming out like the taps? Is there any kind of purification process? So I'm just thinking the rain's on the roof that we're collecting is basically the same rain that's falling and getting into the taps, So it's
Good point. Good point. And I can't speak to that. I'm not sure what exactly the process is. I mean, certainly they have to bring it up to some sort of standard. I've heard they don't. Katie's shaking her head. It's definitely. It's stormwater runoff, but is there purification of any sort? No. Okay. Okay. When it comes to your tap?
Oh, I'm sorry. I missed
Is that what you're talking about when it comes to your tap?
Yeah, exactly. I was really
No.
Okay. So I'm not sure on that, actually. I know some places put chlorine in it of some sorts, you know.
All tap water, just about in every county uses
Yeah.
chlorine.
Yeah.
Yeah. Top line's pretty good.
So they're not using rainwater. I mean, the Sonoma County Water Agency takes it up from their near surface water wells,
Oh,
and then they just add chlorine and they change the pH. That's it.
okay.
We have pretty clean water.
Yeah.
I'm going to pass around a sign-up sheet just because kind of midway through the presentation. If you want to learn more about Daily Acts or get on our once-a-month e-treat list to learn about our upcoming events and whatnot, drop your name on there, please. Other questions up here?
Santa Rosa is contemplating adding fluoride to water, so, then you'll have that choice. Fluoride in the drinking water or
Yeah. Whole other conversation there. Other questions before we get into gray water? Awesome. All right, so gray water reuse. This gets me really excited. I mean, if you look out at something that's like I said, a simple solution that could go to scale, like gray water is like the poster child for this, in my opinion. Just about every house has this gray water spring that is ripe and ready to be tapped. Every house that has a laundry to lands or a washing machine, especially. So basically, I know this is going to be a little bit hard to see. You can definitely come down and check it out afterwards. But essentially, the laundry to landscape system starts by adding this valve right behind your washing machine. And it mounts up there, and it gives you the choice, crank it over. And so you can send it either out to your landscape to be used as irrigation, or you can send it over to your septic system or sewer as it presently goes. And the idea being that it goes, the interior-exterior wall is usually right here or right here. And so it makes its way out and then goes, and it's distributed to a number of mulch basins, basically pits dug down, filled with large chunk mulch, which serve as a carbon filter of sorts. And it's distributed to trees or bushes. Perennial plants are really the best to be coupled with gray water throughout your landscape. And then there's one other important piece of that, which is this black piece at the top here. This is the high part of the system. And this is a siphon break. And so it lets air into the system. And so when your washing machine is running its rinse cycle and the water's flowing out, this lets water to come in there, and so it doesn't continue to try and fill itself and continuously run. So another look at what that might look like. Individual inside doing their laundry. Siphon break here, flows down, comes across. And then it goes into either 1-gallon pots turned upside down, or valve boxes work really well. And you can see the mulch basin here, and it's out at the drip line of the tree, and the roots can grow in and make use of that water. Any questions about that fundamental aspect?
Can this be done for free? If you meet certain standards, is something that a city or the county can provide to residential?
Yeah, actually, so the cities of Petaluma, Cotati, Windsor, and Santa Rosa provide free workshops on the laundry to landscape systems, and they'll actually provide you with pretty much all the materials you'll need, which is between $100 and $150 value to install one of these. If you end up having to make it a bit bigger, you might have to invest, $25 or so. And what's really cool about this is, Daily Acts and a number of others in a working group help change state plumbing code, so you can actually install one of these systems following 10 best practices without requiring a permit, which is pretty cool. And some of you might remember, like 5 years ago or something, and in the perceptions of many still, gray water is this crazy dirty word and no one wanted to touch it. And now it's something that's becoming fairly commonplace. Cities are totally on board and incentivizing this. And with one of these systems, depending on how many folks are in the house and what your laundry machine uses, the average high efficiency machine is anywhere from 7 to 15 gallons a load. Top loader, because it has to fill itself all the way up, is about 40 gallons. But it represents anywhere from 7,000 to 15,000 gallons of water reused on site for a family of 4 in a year, on average or something. So pretty sweet.
You mentioned that it doesn't require a permit, and the cities and municipalities are on board. My question is, what is the city doing on a preventative basis, like bringing the subdivisions, or are they requiring developers to do this outright?
Not yet, to my knowledge. As I said, we work with the cities of Petaluma, Cotati, and Windsor, and I don't know, I don't believe they've made it mandatory yet, though, again, we're in these like really fertile times right now with the drought, and kind of all those conversations I think are back on the table. So I don't know of anywhere in Sonoma County that's made it mandatory yet, but I would love to see that.
Two questions actually. First, soap, like if you're using soap in your laundry, do you have to get a biodegradable soap or something like that? And also, is it possible to hook this system up to like your kitchen sink and use the correct kind of soap and be able to do that as well?
So she was asking about soap and hooking it up to your kitchen sink. And I'm going to get to both of those different pieces. Yes. So again, sort of the visual what that looks like if you're looking down at it, the pipe comes out, comes into one of these mulch basins, and then the mulch basin is sized so the water you'll never see the water on the surface basically, and it infiltrates around, in this case, a citrus tree, and the roots will grow out to that. And a citrus tree is actually a really, really great pairing for a gray water system because they have leaves on them year round, and so they're continuously taking up water. And the neat thing is, we were talking about sculpting the earth to capture the water. Well, you're basically doing that exact same thing here, so you can actually, scale up the size of your mulch basin and also harvest rainwater in it, which is then fueling, which is also then replenishing the aquifers and flushing out the mulch basin in there. So to the questions of soap, the two main things you want to look out for are sodium and boron, are sort of the two main ones, basically just because they'll build up in the soil and kill the soil bacteria. But I'm happy to say there are actually a lot of soaps that will say right on the label, gray water friendly, and they're available at places like Costco and Safeway. I mean, they're fairly common now. And Ecos, I think, is probably the most commonly available one. Folks often use things like soap nuts as well, kind of a natural option, or these O2 Pure machines will actually make, or O3, I guess it might be. They make ozone, and so you never have to use laundry detergent again, which is kind of cool. So there's energy going into there, electricity going in there, and it creates ozone. And so you're washing your clothes without detergent, and they're being washed even during the rinse cycle, which is kind of neat. My parents have one of those, and they really like it. It's like a $300 to $400 investment up front, but again, you never use laundry detergent again. So places where gray water is not appropriate, you sort of are piping it out when you're talking about a laundry to landscape in either half-inch or inch piping. So you can't water lawn with it. You can't spray it in overhead applicators as well, sprinkler heads. Water softeners, because they have salt in them. There are some water softeners that work, but generally speaking, you want to be really careful because those usually are salt-based. In your soils, especially if you have like heavy clay soils and it's been raining a bunch, if they're saturated, don't send more gray water out there. But because you have that choice with the lever, super easy to just change that up in the middle of winter or something. And then again, there are some places, permaculture design is all contextual, and like you have to weigh how much energy it's going to take you to put in that system. If your house has its laundry system in the center of the house and it's on a slab or something, it would require you to like trench through concrete to get it out. Your energy and resources might be better spent elsewhere, just being really clear about it. But gray water is really fun in the sense that it's like, you could have one of these systems going and you throw in a load of laundry and you cruise out to your backyard and you get in that hammock that's hanging between these citrus trees and you're swinging out there, and you reach down and you grab some of the mint, which is more than happy to populate that gray water system for you, and you reach up and grab a lime and maybe you muddle up a mojito while you're chilling out there, waiting for the rinse cycle to kick on, which nourishes the system, which nourishes you. And I would bet you if you invited your neighbor over and put a mojito in their hand, you're like, hey, check this out. They might want to get on board as well. So, how do you have way more fun doing this? That's really key. And this is what it might look like in practice. You can see the washing machine there, integrated out into the landscape. You basically wouldn't even see it. You need to check on it maybe once, twice a year, maybe replace some of the large chunk mulch. Super easy to do. There's a more edible landscape. Same thing. Integrated well, you wouldn't even know the gray water is there. As I said, Daily Axe has been really core with this gray water work here in Sonoma County. We started by installing one in our director's home in 2009. Following year, we did 5 of them in that neighborhood. Following year, we did a couple more across Sonoma County. I think it was like 12 of them or something. And then in 2012, we got super ambitious, and we're like, we're going to host the 100 Gray Water Challenge and try and install 100 of these across the county. And we got 100 systems registered. Some folks are still in process with them, but 100 people have placed their intent out there to do it. And we actually hosted the largest do-it-yourself gray water workshop that's ever been hosted in the nation down in Petaluma. We had 78 folks in the room. So from being this totally fringe thing no one wanted to touch to really kind of being on the forefront, it's really exciting in just a couple years. And it's amazing. We usually don't start this work until the summertime, but we have been getting phone calls and emails off the charts with people interested in doing this stuff. And they're ready to do it now, and it's January, February. So it's really in the forefront of people's minds. Again, the incentive programs I mentioned, definitely check into what your city has to offer for you, both on the gray water front, but all the different water rebate fronts, really cool stuff. And then when we start to put it all together, it sort of becomes this conservation hydrology. How do all these pieces integrate? Again, it's kind of funny to talk about them in isolation with each other, but we have a linear presentation we're going through here. But so when the rain falls, how do we have a receptive landscape that sinks it into swales and is reusing the gray water and catches it in tanks, all the while infiltrating it in, run off into rain gardens or run in instead of run off. And so it's put down into the soil, and it moves really, really slowly through. So we have water in the Russian River, say, during the summer for our cohos. How do we slow that whole cycle down as opposed to when it comes, it quickly goes off, and we get that peaking and dipping cycle that we are seeing right now in a lot of our waterways. And when you do this and you sort of integrate all these pieces, Toby Hemingway nicely talks about in his book, Gaia's Garden, it all goes pop, right? When you integrate the human cycles and the animal cycles and the water pieces and the soil, life sort of surges forth with vitality, And this is actually my backyard at the rental place that I lived in this last year. And the other piece I want to speak to is composting renter's mind, I feel like, a lot of you are young like me, or maybe you're renters like me, and oftentimes we think we're going to do permaculture, we're going to do this stuff when we finally get that house and we get landed and everything's perfect. And it's no, start now. Start small, but start now sort of thing. And I lived in this house for 1 year, and they had this sort of Zen mulch rock garden thing going on. They're like, oh, go play. And we're like, okay. So you can see in 1 year, we totally transformed that place and then moved on. And we've left it better for somebody else. Actually, somebody else from our community has moved in there, and they're totally in love with this beautiful landscape they get to now inherit. So like I said, go out and start small, but start now. And start by assessing the opportunities where you are. There is no one-size-fits-all in permaculture. It's all about contextual design. What makes sense for where you are, sort of thing. There are no silver bullets, just a great many silver BBs, right? And you got to figure out which ones are right for your place. And as I said, dream big, but start small. Start with each one of those daily actions as this kind of building block, that opportunity. And then think integration, always think integration. You're like, if I'm going to put in a gray water system, like I said, why don't you up the size of that basin a little bit and also capture some rainwater, maybe divert your downspout into there. And then as I was speaking to earlier, how do you have way more fun than the status quo? Like the days of environmentalism are over, where people are up on their soapbox, wagging their fingers, screaming at people to wake up. Like, it doesn't work. Eyes glaze over and people move away. I think it's, again, leading with how you live and leading by this really, really contagiously vibrant example that others want to gravitate towards. And when they come to you and they ask the question, it's like, oh, I'm happy to share the answer. It's a totally different paradigm. So in the end there, it's inviting others to join you, which starts to look a little bit like a movement, right? Which is this little piece that we've been building here locally. Has anyone taken part in the 350 Home and Garden Challenge? A couple folks. So for the past 4 years, Daily Access has been doing this action campaign here in Sonoma County called the 350 Home and Garden Challenge. Calling attention to that number 350 is in 350 parts per million, the upper limit of CO2 concentrations to maintain the stable climate with which we as humans have enjoyed for all of our existence. We're rebranding it this year to the Community Resilience Challenge. And I want to invite you all to come and join us in this. And so basically how this shows up is that we have a website where people register their actions. Their actions to save water, grow food, conserve energy, build community, integrating those, taking more than one of them, all good. And in registering your actions, we set this goal of 3,500 actions this year. And we ask people to step up to that. And it could be changing a light bulb. It could be something really small. It could be committing to use a reusable water bottle. you know? It could be putting in a gray water system, revamping a garden, you know, whatever makes sense for you in your life. But by doing this, we basically make the movement visible here in Sonoma County. And in making it visible, we encourage others to join in, you know? You're not a fringe weirdo alone in your backyard harvesting gray water and growing food. You're on the leading edge, and you're in really good company. And that's what this movement is all about. That's what the Community Challenge is all about. So like I said, encourage you all to join us. This actually takes place on May 17th and 18th, but we'll be building buzz all the way up to it. And you know, it's this funny thing, you know, we at Daily Acts touch about 7,000 people, educating or, you know, speaking to them like this in the course of a year. And we've been musing on this thing, like, what if each of those people that we connect with during the year go out and talk to just 10 people, and move them to action in even like some small way, or inspire them in some small way? That's this huge ripple that, you know, we could really be reaching a tipping point here in Sonoma County in a big way if each one of you goes out and just connects with 10 people on this front and moves them to action in some small way. Invite them to join the Community Resilience Challenge, you know? Because behavior change psychologists look at it, and, you know, you can give people educational materials, hugely important. You can give them financial incentives, also important, you know, want to have both those arrows in the quiver. But by far and away, the best way to move people to action is to create the perception that other people are doing this and it's cool. And that's exactly what this challenge does. And not only has that been this sort of groundswell that's been building for the last 5 years here in Sonoma County, but now the transition challenge has emerged, which is like a replication of this on a national front. And Contra Costa County is doing this, and Amherst is doing it on the East Coast. And so other people are taking note of what's happening here in Sonoma County, and they're replicating it to do the same. So as I've been hinting at, you know, I think the move is really about practicing sustainable hedonism, right? And that's that sweet spot where service to self, which is to say living in your passion, lines up with service to the collective. And there's sort of a nonlinear piece to that then. I think it's a 1 + 1 = 3 sort of dynamic, and this new thing emerges. And as I mentioned before, you know, it's about living this positive, proactive, solution-oriented existence that's so vibrant that it becomes contagious and others can't help but join in. So I invite you all to join us, join me, come sit by our fire and do that. Thank you much. So I just want to make sure, I'm going to take questions, but I want to make sure that the sign-up sheet is still circulating around, and I'm going to leave this up here, some of the upcoming events we have, just a couple of them. I don't know what that yellow thing is. I couldn't get it out of there.
Ryan will repeat the questions, so make succinct questions so people can.
Has anyone developed a curriculum for K-6 on some of the concepts that you described?
That's so timely. Jay was actually in our permaculture design course, which just concluded this last weekend, and we have this amazing middle school teacher down here from Hood River, Oregon, who's totally taking the concepts of permaculture, this sort of eco-literacy, and weaving it into the state standards. So it's like, I'm meeting all the state standards, and I'm doing all this too. And his students are doing amazing work. They have aquaponics systems, and you know, they've helped design LEED Platinum buildings and huge school gardens. So yes, absolutely. On a more local front, the school garden teacher training program at the Oxnard Arts and Ecology Center is a wonderful resource for that, and doing exactly the same thing, sort of taking school gardens out of this little box over here in the corner of campus and weaving it into the whole culture and curriculum of campuses. Yeah.
Salmon Creek is also a possible resource for that, Salmon Creek School?
Salmon Creek Middle School, yeah, which I'm proud to call my alma mater, is a really great resource for that as well. Beautiful school garden, big LEED Platinum building, and a lot of place-based learning going on. I didn't repeat the question. Any other questions?
What was the woman that worked for Blue Barrel? What was her name?
Jessie,
and do they offer, like, please forgive me, but like payments? I mean, do they offer like a system that you can set up a payment plan? Or does, kind of a two-part question, does the city offer a rain collection system, whatever county, anybody offer a rain collection system that you can make payments towards? I mean, I know you can go down to Harmony and buy out one of those tanks right out, but those are expensive. It's a big investment.
Right. Good question. So he was asking if there's payment plans either through Jesse with Blue Barrel Systems or other incentive programs. I don't work directly with the city of Santa Rosa. depending where you live. The city of Santa Rosa, I believe, though, actually has incentive programs for water harvesting. And so they might give you the barrels for free. I don't know. It's worth checking into that if you live here in Santa Rosa. Outside of that, it's, I don't know, finding them, it's definitely worth checking with Jessie. Blue Barrel Systems, I mean, she's just launching her business, so she might be into that with you. And then sort of being proactive about it as well and saying, like, I'm looking for barrels, you know, putting that out through all your different networks and stuff, and I think you'd be surprised what shows up. Like, if it's just the barrels, and then you're buying the plumbing for the other stuff. But there's quite a few of them floating around because of the wine industry.
You had mentioned two names, and I didn't quite catch the full name. Lancaster, and in regards to rainwater, and then Eric.
Yes, the first one is Brad Lancaster, and it's Eric Olson, O-H-L-S-E-N. And Eric Olson has the Permaculture Skill Center again, which has tons of volunteer days as well if you want to go out and get your hands in the soil with them, right across from the flea market on Highway 116 south of Sebastopol. And it's open to the public at any time as well if you just want to stop in there and kind of look at some of this stuff in practice. Yeah?
Is it just the size of the catchment system or the tank that is the limit, the size limit, or it has to stay under a certain size before a permit is required by the city?
So she was asking about the size of the systems and when a permit is triggered. To my knowledge, certainly worth double checking if you're going to go for it, it's up to 4,995 gallons. You don't need a permit. At 5,000 gallons, you need a permit. And so the tanks are sized accordingly for that. And that's the one piece that I know about for sure, is that size limit there.
And do the tanks have to be underground?
No, certainly not. In fact, it's fairly common practice to put them just on a pad of like base rock, like you'd use for a road or something. Yeah, much cheaper. I mean, if you have to dig it below ground, that's serious expense. And there's all kinds of cool, you know, different size tanks and stuff. There's like the ones that you saw at City Hall down there, which are called hogs. And you can put them, you can actually build a fence around them. You can put them under a deck. There's a whole number of different things you can do with them. And the Australians, who have been in drought for years, have really been, you know, working on cracking this nut. And like, they've got all kinds of different cool systems and bladders and, you know, different stuff to integrate rainwater. And actually, my relatives were down from Canada last night, and they live in the western part of Canada. And they're like, oh yeah, this is totally common practice. Like we just do that up there, you know. Like everyone has bladders integrated into their houses somewhere and stuff, which I thought was kind of interesting, considering they get quite a bit of rain. Other questions? Sweet. Excellent. Thank you so much.
So thank you very much, Ryan. Just a couple things. It sounds like Ryan had a lot of resources that people are interested in, and I wrote some of them down, and I'll follow up with him and get some of those resources. But the incentive programs with the cities, when we go into these drought periods, they often have incentives for rain barrel collection and things like that, where they'll actually provide you. So just a reminder for those of you that are enrolled in the Environmental Forum class, we don't meet next week, but we do meet on March 5th, so in 2 weeks. Make sure to sign in, and then we have another public presentation on